process inadvertently facilitate this?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my honourable friend is so right to raise this important and concerning issue that will be one of importance to members across the House. The online safety bill will ensure that big platforms, including Instagram, will have to do a great deal more to take scams seriously and keep people safe. If firms fail to keep people safe, Ofcom will be able to give huge fines of up to multi-billions of pounds for the largest companies, or even block sites. We are considering the Joint Committee's recommendations carefully at the moment and will incorporate them where we feel the bill can be strengthened further. So I can assure my honourable friend that this is work that is underway.
Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the leader for the work he does in following up on parliamentary questions that are of low quality, and surprisingly perhaps praise one that I've received from the Department of Health when I asked different departments what their policy was on references for recruitment. And not only did the Department of Health answer my question, but they very helpfully included the Cabinet Office round-robin guidance to all the departments on lines to take in answering my question, including a section explaining my motivation in asking the questions, which I thought was very useful, as I was wondering what it was myself. Could this novel, perhaps to use the word of the week, but inadvertent innovation, be adopted in all such cases?
Well, as it happens, Mr. Speaker, I've often thought that openness, and the greater openness, the more understanding there is from other sides, and therefore this inadvertent mistake sounds to be one that has been rather beneficial.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The independent inquiry into child sexual abuse reported its conclusions this week and made a number of findings about failings of police and local councils to protect vulnerable children. The report describes a horrific culture that forced survivors of CSE to fight to be believed, and those who were heard were made to feel as though they brought exploitation upon themselves, all hampered by poor data collection on a range of issues, including ethnicity of perpetrators. Please can we find time in government time for debate on this issue, which affects so many communities across the country, including in Rother Valley.
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend in the work that he's been doing on this particularly important issue. The Government is committed to considering carefully the inquiry's recommendations and will respond fully within the inquiry's deadline of 6 months. Obviously, I can't comment on the recommendations at this stage. However, the Government is delivering the action set out in our groundbreaking Tackling Child Sexual Strategy, which sets out our whole system response to tackling child sexual abuse, including exploitation. The Government will shortly publish an updated child exploitation disruption toolkit to help the police and local authorities to prevent and disrupt this organised exploitation, and it is likely that there will be an opportunity for members to discuss the work of the IICSA when it publishes its final report later this year.
Patrick Gregg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During COP26, the Women's Institute distributed crocheted bangles like this one, bracelets made by Jean Boyle of Flockton, WI, to remind decision makers there should be no more loopholes in carbon emission reduction targets. So can we have a debate on how decisions made at COP26 will be monitored and held to account later this year at COP27?
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I congratulate the WI on its terrific work. It's not just marmalade that it makes, also making items for the honourable gentleman to wear. Of course, that there will be regular discussions on COP26. I think we will be held to account throughout this House in adjournment debates, backbench business debates, and indeed questions to the President of COP.
Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday I met with Fran Hall and Lobby Akinola, who are bereaved families, representatives of the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice campaign. They are very angry that the COVID inquiry is being delayed, and they are wanting to know when it will be launched so that the hearings, so that the evidence is contained and made secure, and that the hearings can go ahead in spring as has been promised. If there are more delays, the COVID inquiry will be kicked down into the summer or longer. They need to start in spring. Could we have a statement from the Government about the COVID-19 inquiry and when it will start?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think preliminary work is beginning. As I understand it, the website was opened yesterday. Now, I will confirm this to the Honourable Lady, but this is happening. The inquiry will go ahead, and it is very important that it goes ahead when all the facts are known.
Andrew Jones.
Mr. Speaker, we had the very positive levelling up statement and white paper yesterday, but please can we have a debate on one element of levelling up, which I think is urgent and specific enough to merit direct consideration, and that's the role of education, skills and colleges. It's the lack of skills or accessing a skilled workforce, which is the issue most raised with me by local businesses.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I agree with him. Education and skills have a vital role to play in levelling up the country. And like him, I welcomed the announcement of the White Paper from my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, yesterday. Through our multi-billion-pound plan for jobs, we have seen 120,000 young people starting their Kickstart job and over 160,000 apprentices being supported through the Apprenticeship Initiative Scheme. There is a £3.8 billion increase in skills spending, and we are funding a lifetime guarantee and quadrupling places on skills boot camps. As announced by the Secretary of State yesterday, the government's mission is to have new high-quality skills training targeted at the lowest skilled areas, with 200,000 more people completing high-quality skills training annually. So I think what my honourable friend is calling for is in the pipeline.
Indeed, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Leader of the House could make time for the Veterans Minister to make even a written statement on what progress he's making on ensuring that the Veterans Card is issued to former service personnel who served before 2018. I've been asking for an update from the Veterans Minister, from his predecessor and the predecessor before that, since it was announced. It would just be good to understand what the delays are and why it is the government isn't willing to issue this much-needed card for veterans.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can commit to the honourable gentleman that in my regular correspondence with ministers post-business questions, I will take this up with the Veterans Minister and get him an answer.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unlike the Leader of the House, I'll never have enough money to own an Aston Martin, but I've got a constituent who's lucky enough to own one. It was repaired after being flood damaged. He drove it safely in Cyprus for 4 years. He's got insurance for it, and he's got an MOT showing it's roadworthy. But the DVLA won't allow him to register it to drive on the road because, according to their database, it was written off due to be scrapped by a previous insurance company. Now, I've tried to assist my constituent, but the DVLA have more or less told me to go away with a capital F. So, can I ask the Secretary of State for Transport to have a look at this and to see how DVLA make decisions and who they're accountable to?
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. Sadly, I don't have an Aston Martin, though I think they are particularly beautiful and elegant cars, and therefore his constituent has my greatest sympathy, finding this bureaucratic morass is stopping him registering his car and being able to use it when it is now in working condition and with an MOT. DVLA has been the mainstay of problems for members of Parliament in recent weeks. I was told the backlog was sorted, but I'm afraid that's not the experience of my constituents. I'll definitely take this up for his constituent with the Secretary of State for Transport.
Boris Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, I'm always pleased to listen to the Leader of the House. I like it better when he seems to be speaking for this House of Commons rather than as a sort of PR man for the Prime Minister. He said some very thoughtful things when he talked about police and the Metropolitan Police and police behaviour, about a few rotten apples can make such a difference in a culture of an institution. I hope he'll reflect on what he said and apply it to what's been going on in this House of Commons and in this government. But while he's thinking about that, can we have an early debate on the campaign my great old friend, the member for Barking, has been raising in this House with no response? Why is it so much Russian money is swilling around in London? It's into the Conservative Party. It is everywhere, to a level where we're told now that we can't have sanctions against the Russians because there's so much Russian laundering money in this city.
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, this government is made up of a collection of the finest, best apples you have ever seen anywhere in the world. They are the beauty of Bath, the Cox's Orange Pippins, the best, the finest that a costermonger could ever have on his stall. But to come to the point on Russian money, as I said earlier, that should a further Russian incursion into Ukraine happen, allies must enact swift retributive responses, including unprecedented sanctions. We have very tough laws against dirty money, and they are enforced.
Final question, Owen Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, I know the Leader places a great importance in the honesty and integrity of members, but more than 2 years ago, and during the election campaign, the Prime Minister gave a categoric assurance that members of the miners' pension scheme would receive the monies back from that pension scheme. So could we now have a statement to tell us when that's going to happen, given the length of time they've had to wait and the importance it's placed to ex-miners in my Midlothian constituency.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for raising this point on behalf of his constituents, and it has been raised before by other members, and I have been following it up with the relevant department.
We're now going to come to the first of the statements. I'm going to call the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK's economic recovery has been quicker and stronger than forecast. In the depths of the pandemic, our economy was expected to return to its pre-crisis level at the end of 2022. Instead, it got there in November 2021, a full year earlier. Unemployment was expected to peak at nearly 12%. Instead, it peaked at 5.2% and has now fallen to just over 4%, saving more than 2 million jobs. And with the fastest growing economy in the G7 this year, over 400,000 more people on payrolls than before the pandemic, and business investment rising, it is no wonder, Mr. Speaker, that borrowing is set to fall from £320 billion last year, the highest ever peacetime level, to just £46 billion by the end of this Parliament. As we emerge from the depths of the worst recession in 300 years, we should be proud of our economic record. The economy is stronger because of the plan we put in place, because of the actions we took to protect families and businesses, and that plan is working. But for all the progress we are making, the job is not yet done. Right now, I know that the #1 issue on people's minds is the rising cost of living. It is the Independent Bank of England's role to deliver low and stable inflation. And the Governor will set out their judgments at midday today. And just as the government stood behind the British people through the pandemic, so we will help people deal with one of the biggest costs they now face, energy. The energy regulator, Ofgem, announced this morning that the energy price cap will rise in April to £1,971, an increase of £693 for the average household. Without government action, this would be incredibly tough for millions of hard-working families. So the government is going to step in to directly help people manage those extra costs. Mr. Speaker, before I set out the steps we are taking, let me explain what is happening to energy prices and why. People's energy bills are rising because it is more expensive for companies who supply our energy to buy oil, coal and gas. Of the £693 increase in the April price cap, around 80% comes from wholesale energy prices. Over the last year, the price of gas alone has quadrupled. And because over 85% of homes in Britain are heated with a gas boiler, and around 40% of our electricity comes from gas, this is hitting households hard. Now, the reason gas prices are soaring are global. Across Europe and Asia, a long cold winter last year depleted gas stores. Disruption to other energy sources like nuclear and wind left us relying more than usual on gas during the summer months. Surging demand in the world's manufacturing centres in Asia, at the same time as countries like China are moving away from coal, is further increasing demand for gas. And concerns about a possible Russian incursion into Ukraine are putting further pressure on wholesale gas markets. And so, prices are rising. Mr. Speaker, the price cap has meant that the impact of soaring gas prices has so far fallen predominantly on energy companies, so much so that some suppliers who couldn't afford to meet those extra costs have gone out of business as a result. It is not sustainable to keep holding the price of energy artificially low. For me to stand here and pretend we don't have to adjust to paying higher prices would be wrong and dishonest. But what we can do is take the sting out of a significant price shock for millions of families by making sure the increase in prices is smaller initially and spread over a longer period. Mr. Speaker, without government intervention, the increase in the price cap would leave the average household having to find an extra £693. The actions I'm announcing today will provide to the vast majority of households just over half of that amount, £350. In total, the government is going to help around 28 million households this year. Taken together, this is a plan to help with the cost of living worth around £9 billion. We are delivering that support in 3 different ways. First, we will spread the worst of the extra costs of this year's energy price shock over time. This year, all domestic electricity customers will receive an upfront discount on their bills worth £200. Energy suppliers will apply the discount on people's bills from October, with the government meeting the cost in full. That discount will automatically be repaid from people's bills in equal £40 instalments over the next 5 years. This is the right way to support people while staying on track with our plans to repair the public finances. And because we are taking a fiscally responsible approach, we can also provide more help faster to those who need it most, the second part of our plan. We're going to give people a £150 council tax rebate to help with the cost of energy in April, and this discount won't need to be repaid. And I do want to be clear with the House that we are deliberately not just giving support to people on benefits. Lots of people on middle incomes are struggling right now too. So we have decided to provide the council tax rebate to households in bands A to D. This means around 80% of all homes in England will benefit. And the third part of our plan will provide local authorities with a discretionary fund of nearly £150 million to help those lower income households who happen to live in higher council tax properties and households in bands A to D who are exempt from council tax at all. We're also confirming today that we'll go ahead with existing plans to expand eligibility for the Warm Homes discount by almost a third, so that 3 million vulnerable households will now benefit from that scheme. And that's not all we're doing to help vulnerable households. We're providing £3 billion over this Parliament to help more than 500,000 lower-income homes become more energy efficient, saving them on average £290 a year. Increasing the national living wage to £9.50 an hour in April, a rise of over £1,000 for 2 million low-paid workers. And we're providing an effective tax cut for those on universal credit, allowing almost 2 million households to keep an average of £1,000 per year. The payment through energy suppliers will apply across England, Wales and Scotland. Energy policy is devolved in Northern Ireland with a different regulator, and the government does not have the legal powers to intervene. But we will make sure the executive is funded to do something similar, with around £150 million for Northern Ireland through the Barnett formula next year. And because the council tax system is England only, total Barnett consequentials of around £565 million will be provided to the devolved administrations in the usual way. Mr. Speaker, I know that some in this House have argued for a VAT cut on energy. However, that policy would disproportionately benefit wealthier households. There would be no guarantee that suppliers would pass on the discounts to all customers, and we should be honest with ourselves. This would become a permanent government subsidy on everyone's bills. A permanent subsidy worth £2.5 billion every year at a time when we are trying to rebuild the public finances. Instead, our plan allows us to provide more generous support faster to those who need it most, providing 28 million households with at least £200 and the vast majority receiving £350. It is fair, it is targeted, it is proportionate. It is the right way to help people with the spike in energy costs. Mr. Speaker, today's announcements are just one part of the government's plan to tackle this country's most pressing economic challenges. A plan for growth with record investment in infrastructure, innovation and skills. A plan to restore the public finances with debt falling by the end of this Parliament. A plan to cut waiting lists and back the NHS with £29 billion over 3 years and a permanent new source of funding. And with the measures I've announced today, a plan to help with the rising cost of energy, with £350 more in the pockets of tens of millions of hard-working families. That's our plan to build a stronger economy, not just today, but for the long term, and I commend it to this House.
I now call the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor for his statement? We have known that this price rise was coming for months, and today we learn that the energy price cap will increase to £1,971 in April. In October, I called on the government to provide immediate support for households, cutting VAT on their energy bills and saving £200 of bills, with £400 in extra targeted support for those who need it most, which would mean for some of the poorest families in our country almost no increase in energy bills from April. The government have not done that today. Now, we all remember when the Prime Minister said that cutting VAT was one of the benefits of Brexit. He said, and I quote, "When we vote leave, we will be able to scrap this unfair and damaging tax." Could there ever be a time where this policy is more needed than it is today? And I would have thought that the Prime Minister, with his unblemished record of integrity, would defend the commitments that he has made. But instead, it's another pledge thrown onto the bonfire of broken Tory promises. And the uncomfortable truth for the Chancellor is that even after what he has announced today, families in Britain will be still paying hundreds of pounds more for their energy, including some of the poorest families, from April as a result of the breathtaking rise in energy prices just announced by Ofgem. Millions of people cutting back to pay the bills. Citizens' Advice have said that they have seen a record number of people in January struggling with fuel debts before the energy price increase. But what does the government offer? A buy now, pay later scheme that loads up costs for tomorrow. High prices as far as the eye can see. This year, next year and the year after that. Give with one hand now and take it all back later. The party opposite used to talk about the nation's credit card. Well, today, Mr. Speaker, we've seen the Chancellor force British households to load up their credit cards. By lending billions of pounds to energy companies, the Chancellor is gambling that prices are going to fall. But they could go up further in October. What then? Billions more loaded onto people's bills? The best way of targeting support to those who need it most would be an increase to £400 and an extension to 9 million households of the Warm Homes discount, as Labour have proposed. Their scheme today is a pale imitation of Labour's, especially for the households and pensioners on the most modest incomes. The Chancellor instead is using council tax to target extra help. That will mean many of the poorest households will not get extra support, while some of the richest do. And it's people living in the North and the Midlands who will lose out most. The hypocrisy the day after the government's levelling up white paper is obvious.
Order. Mr Holden, I think we need to be a little calmer. I'm sure you'll want to catch my eye, and it's not the way to do so. Sir Chancellor Rachel Reeves.
So can the Chancellor confirm how many people who are fuel poor will miss out on council tax support compared to the Warm Homes discount support that Labour have announced? Mr. Speaker, the government had a choice. Only today, Shell announced that their profits had quadrupled to $20 billion. They described their results as momentous. Dividends up, profits up, and people's energy bills up too. Labour's plan would impose a one-off windfall tax on those excess profits. But this Chancellor would rather shield the oil and gas producers, while at the same time loading the cost onto working people and pensioners. Cabinet ministers have described the oil and gas producers as struggling. struggling, Mr. Speaker. Tell that to the 1 in 5 people who are already skipping meals so that they can pay their energy bills. And, Mr. Speaker, this energy crisis has not happened overnight. It's a decade of dither and delay from the party opposite that has brought us to this point. A decade of failure to regulate our energy market. A decade in which they have slashed our gas storage capacity, leaving us more reliant than ever on Russia for our gas imports. A decade of failure to make the most of solar, tidal and wind energy. And a decade of stalled progress on insulating our homes to keep bills low, not just for 1 year, but into the future too. It has been the Tory decade that has led to this announcement, Mr. Speaker, of the biggest increase in the price of domestic energy since records began. That is what the Chancellor should acknowledge and should apologise for today. The Conservatives aren't solving the cost of living crisis because the Conservative Party are the cost of living crisis.
Mr. Speaker, the opposition may have some sound bites, but they certainly don't have a policy. Mr. Speaker. In contrast, this government has announced measures.
Mr. Seeley, is there something wrong with that wood you keep knocking? Because I think it's in good order. You don't need to test for woodworm. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
In contrast, Mr. Speaker, this government has announced measures to share the burden with consumers and help manage the global price rise. And despite the faux outrage from the benches opposite, I'm sure that even they would admit privately, Mr. Speaker, the support just announced is both generous and comprehensive. Let me take some of the honourable lady's points in turn, Mr. Speaker. Well, first of all, on the topic of VAT, can I say, Mr. Speaker, how very welcome it is that the opposition are recognising the benefits of Brexit. I hope they will join me in celebrating the fact that we have been able to change mass migration to this country after decades, that we can create new free ports in places like Teesside, that we can sign new free trade deals, and we can deregulate our economy to drive faster growth. She talked about VAT, Mr. Speaker. VAT on average would be worth £90 to every household. What we are doing is providing £150 to those households who really need it and delivering that support quicker, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the honourable lady also tried to claim that it was the government's responsibility to manage global gas prices. It is very clear, and any person sensibly looking at this will acknowledge, that what is causing the increase in gas prices are global factors, as I outlined in my statement. No British government, no British Chancellor can change what is happening in Asia, or indeed can stop a nuclear power plant from going offline in Germany. And she should acknowledge that. Even in places like Norway, electricity bills are rising because these are global factors at play, which she would do well to acknowledge. And I know the right honourable gentleman sitting next to her will know that, having spent a lot of time on this. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, I do want to address this point about our support for the most vulnerable, because I am proud of this government's record in supporting those who need our help. The policies that we have announced today are progressive in their nature. A flat rate will, of course, mean far more to those on lower incomes or with lower energy bills. It is worth 5 times as much as a percentage of income for those in the lowest incomes as those on the highest incomes. And she talked about insulation. We are spending over this Parliament £3 billion to improve the energy efficiency and insulation of over 500,000 households in fuel poverty, Mr. Speaker. That is the right thing to do, and it will save those vulnerable families, on average, £300 a year, not just this year, but every year going forward. And we have already announced those plans, Mr. Speaker. And lastly, to address her point on windfall taxes, and of course, they sound superficially appealing, Mr. Speaker, but we on this side of the House deal with complex problems in a responsible way. Now, the obvious impact of a windfall tax would be, Mr. Speaker, to deter investment. It's as simple as that. And at this moment, I want to see more investment in the North Sea, not less. Last last year, Mr. Speaker, we saw the lowest amount of investment on record in the North Sea, as my honourable friend pointed out just the other day. And there are billions of pounds, £11 billion of projects lined up to go. I want to unlock that investment because that is good for this country. It is good for British jobs, Mr. Speaker, and it is good for our energy security. So, Mr. Speaker, we will pursue policies that are good for the interests of this country, not just today, but in the future. And I know that my right honourable friend, the Energy Secretary, is working very hard to make sure that we have an energy market that is fit for the future. We have made investments in nuclear, which, as he rightly pointed out, investments in nuclear that were ignored by the party opposite when they were in power, that we are now fixing. So in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I am not blind to the challenges that we face. I have to say, though, to the right honourable member opposite and her colleagues, we on this side of the House did not have the luxury of sitting on the sidelines and throwing stones. Faced with the gravest of crises, this government chose to protect millions of jobs. It chose to support millions of businesses. It chose to invest in a world-leading vaccination programme. And it chose a balanced approach to COVID, so we could open up faster than anywhere else in Europe, Mr. Speaker. We did these things at record speed at a time of great uncertainty. And we will always strive to learn from mistakes. Nothing is ever perfect when responding to a crisis. But I'd say to the party opposite, there is a fine line between reasonable criticism and political opportunism. And in my experience, Mr. Speaker, the British people can always tell the difference.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome my right honourable friend's announcement today? Will he agree that a cut in VAT to solve this crisis is a completely flawed policy?
Absolutely.
As evidenced by the 3 economists who spoke to the Treasury Select Committee this week, including Torsten Bell from the Resolution Foundation, who wanted something far more targeted, such as my right honourable friend has announced today. It is clear one factor in this crisis is Russia's willingness to weaponise its gas supplies. Will he confirm, if there is any incursion into the Ukraine, that this country and other international countries will look at weaponising our banking system, which would be economically catastrophic for Russia should they do that?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his question. On the point of VAT, I have nothing further to add, and he is right that what we are doing is more targeted, it is faster, and it is more generous to those who need our help. And I can assure him that with regard to sanctions on Russia, absolutely nothing is off the table, and we are working very closely with our international partners, as the Foreign Secretary has outlined, to prepare a very robust package of sanctions.
SNP spokesperson Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor brags about having the fastest recovery, but that's actually wrong because Italy, for a start, has got a higher growth rate. But if the economy is doing so well, why is he still introducing a £12 billion tax on workers this financial year? Why is it taking to the last minute to try and do something about the cost of living crisis? And then why is so much of this actually a loan that bill payers are going to pay back? He talks about not doing a VAT cut because he wants a more targeted approach. So how is giving everybody a rebate a targeted approach? It's illogical. Now, Mr. Speaker, the reality is the Treasury is currently raking it in compared to where they thought they'd be in the March 2021 budget. An extra £3 billion this financial year, next year, from oil and gas revenues. VAT receipt predictions in October last year was nearly £40 billion higher than what they were for March 2021. So that's a lot of money the Treasury could be freeing up. Meanwhile, average energy bills increased this year to nearly £1,200, up from £700 the year before, bringing in an extra £0.6 billion in VAT. The VAT increase due to the cap rise is going to bring the Treasury another £0.8 billion a year. So there's so much more money they could free up. Now, the Scottish Government's bringing in the £20 per week child payment and then uprating the child winter assistance payment. So could the Chancellor not look at doing something similar? Will he confirm that the council tax rebate proposal he's bringing in will have Barnett consequentials, how much that will be, and that will go to the Scottish Government? Will he look at devolving further budgets and powers so that Scotland can do a more targeted approach? Now, National Energy Action estimated that the increase in the cap would put 6 million people into fuel poverty. So with his measures, what impact assessment has government made, and how many households will be in fuel poverty? How many more premature deaths will there be because people are in fuel poverty? And lastly, Mr Speaker, in the Highlands of Scotland, the Highlands generate electricity and send it to the rest of the UK, but yet electricity users in the Highlands and the restricted meters pay 4p a unit more for electricity, £400 more on their bills. When will the Treasury and Bees work with Ofgem to remove that ridiculous surcharge for these people in the Highlands?
Leader. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to confirm to the honourable gentleman that the Barnett consequentials for Scotland will be around £290 million, which I hope that he will welcome. And my honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, will be speaking to Kate Forbes later today to go over the details. And I very much hope that the Scottish Government will choose to do something very similar to what we are doing to the benefit of Scottish citizens. Of course, Scottish citizens will benefit from the rebate scheme on bills because that is a GB-wide policy, as I outlined. And with regard to his broader points on the North Sea, I said that there is a clear point of difference, I think, between us on this side of the House and the SNP, because we believe in the future of the North Sea. We believe in the oil and gas industry. We believe in those 200,000 jobs that it supports, and we want to make sure it plays an important part of our transition to net zero, Mr. Speaker. And I hope that he can see that that is the right thing for Scotland and will join us in supporting that very important industry.
Lucy Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for his excellent statement. Particularly its thoughtful and progressive nature of the actions that he plans to take. Does he agree with me that it is right to help not only the poorest, but also those on middle incomes who are struggling with their household budgets?
Absolutely. No, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I know this is something that she has pressed me on behalf of her constituents. A price increase of this magnitude impacts almost everybody, Mr. Speaker, and it is right that our response therefore helps almost everybody. That's what we are doing, making sure that those families that are working hard on household incomes of 40,000 or so will still get the £150 worth of support. 4 out of every household will benefit. We are on the side of hard-working families like that, Mr. Speaker, and I make no apology for it.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. I see we now have the Klarna Chancellor, the pay now, buy now, get it now and pay later. But there is a really important issue about council tax. When areas like mine and parts of London, there are not many people in bands, certainly bands A to C. But who is going to fund the council tax rebate? Will that be fully funded by the Exchequer? And will there be a weighting of the £150 million fund to the areas like mine, where I've got poor households in high-value properties?
Mr. Speaker, just to confirm for the honourable lady, it's council tax bands A to D, so it is 4 out of every 5 households across England. Obviously, that will vary by region. I can confirm to her that will be fully Exchequer funded, and on top of that, there will be a discretionary fund of around £150 million, which the Department for Local Government will decide the best allocation formula for, and that will be able to be used by local authorities to help those low-income households who happen to live in higher council tax band properties, and indeed those people, students, for example, that are exempt from paying council tax at all, but we would want to get the support to them.
Peter Bowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Conservatives believe in holding taxes down and putting more money in people's pockets, and so they can decide how to spend it. Socialists believe in raising taxes and then choosing to give it back in the form of discounts and rebates to selected people the government think need it. Could the Chancellor tell me his approach in increasing national insurance contributions and then handing money back to different people through rebates and discounts, is that a Conservative approach or a Socialist approach?
Well, Mr. Speaker, with the greatest respect for my honourable friend, I also believe that it is a Conservative approach to be responsible with this nation's public finances. I believe after recovering from the worst economic shock in 300 years, where borrowing spiraled to levels that we have not seen since World War II, that it is right and responsible to tackle that and get our borrowing and debt down to sustainable levels, which is why I've had to make difficult decisions, but also to fund the country's #1 priority, the NHS, and an unacceptably high growing number of people waiting for operations. That's what that funding will do. It's right that we provide a secure, long-term, sustainable funding stream for the country's #1 priority, and they should be reassured that every penny of that levy is going to go to the thing that they care most about.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's an obvious unfairness in the massive profits being made by the oil and gas companies at a time when families are facing such great hardship. Surely the Chancellor must make an intervention to address that. And he's announced a discretionary fund for local councils. Worried families will have no idea how much that will benefit them, if at all. Will he instead introduce an uplift in universal credit, having cut universal credit so unfairly just 4 months ago?
Chancellor. Mr. Speaker, it's worth pointing out that the energy companies that he talks about already are subject to a far higher rate of corporation tax, in fact double the rate of corporation tax that other companies pay, 40% versus currently 19%. And I won't repeat my arguments about the windfall tax that I made earlier. And no, Mr. Speaker, we believe the right way is to make sure that people can keep more of what they earn, which is why we cut the universal credit taper rate by 8 percentage points. That's a £2.2 billion tax cut. It will benefit 2 million of the lowest paid people in our society. It's making work pay. It's strengthening incentives to work. It's the right policy. It's a Conservative policy.
Esther McVeigh.
Mr. Speaker, many families across the country will struggle with their energy bills this year, so I am grateful that we have a Chancellor who's in touch with that. Will he commit to continue to ensure those in Middle Britain are supported by this government, as well as those on the very lowest of incomes?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right, and I can give her that reassurance, and hopefully today's announcements will provide her with the confidence she needs that both I and this government are committed to being on the side of those hard-working families, which I know she does an enormous amount to represent and champion in this House.
Lawrence Shalami.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor mentioned that energy suppliers will apply the discount on people's bills from October. I'm contacted by Vauxhall constituents on an almost daily basis. Residents living in properties that are too cold to heat. Residents pleading with me to help them get those repairs done. Current data suggests that over 8,000 households in Vauxhall are already living in fuel poverty now, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So what does the Chancellor have to say to my constituents who are already unable to make ends meet now and who are facing a hike of over £700 in their energy bills?
But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what I can tell them is they won't have to wait until October, as the party opposite's proposals would have had them do. They will receive £150 in April, Mr. Speaker. And then in October, they will receive the rebate on their bills at a time when the energy price cap will also be looked at again. So it will be appropriate that there is further action to support then. But this is why this policy is the right policy. By using the council tax system, we can get money to people faster, Mr. Deputy Speaker. £150 in April for her constituents.
Matt Hancock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome this smart set of measures, because we must retain fiscal discipline, because otherwise the problem will get worse rather than better. But can I also ask a question about monetary policy, which the Chancellor mentioned? He mentioned the independence of the Bank of England decision, which has just been announced, but there's some chatter about working in tandem with the bank. So can he confirm that in monetary policy, not just in interest rate setting, but with the withdrawal of QE, that bank independence will be respected?
Chancellor. I can give my right honourable friend that assurance. It is absolutely right and proper that the bank is independent of government on matters of monetary policy. That is exactly what has always been the case over the last 2 years and will continue to be the case, and I can wholeheartedly give him that assurance.
Nick Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor will be pleased that his campaign team are behind him today. Does he really think that the super profits of $20 billion made by Shell are untouchable? His hands-off approach won't persuade many people across our country.
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I think what millions of people across this country will see today is a government that is on their side. Yeah. It is a government that is taking action to help them with the anxiety they feel about rising energy bills. It is doing it in a proportionate, fair and targeted way, and it is doing it in a responsible way to protect them, not just today, but for years into the future as well.
Robert Buckland. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Thousands of families in Swindon and millions of households across the country will welcome the immediate help on council tax that he has announced today in his very welcome statement. Does he agree with me that the COD analysis that we heard from the Right Honourable Lady opposite about the energy market in Europe is really demonstrable evidence of the paucity of the party opposite's approach to energy? And isn't our approach to a zero-carbon economy, but based upon energy security, going to be the way that we deliver our country out of these short-term problems?
Yeah, well, my right honourable friend makes, as ever, an excellent point. He's absolutely right. I agree wholeheartedly with him, and he will know my right honourable friend, the Energy Secretary, is working very hard to undo some of the mistakes that the party opposite made in the past.
Chris Bryant. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I know the Chancellor's all pumped up, but this is pretty puny stuff, to be honest. £350 isn't going to touch the sides of the problem for my constituents in the Rhondda. Gas and electricity up for the average family in my constituency by £686. Fuel up by £314. The average weekly shop up by £385. Universal credit cut by £1,040. National insurance up by £150. And frozen tax allowances by him will cost another £300. That's £2,875 in a constituency where the average wage is £27,000. That is really going to cause hardship. Yep. £350 doesn't even touch it.
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, the party opposite have proposals which would give considerably less to many people. So it's a bit rich to hear that. But he had a long list of numbers, Mr Deputy Speaker. I also have a long list of numbers. 400,000 more people on payroll than there were before the crisis. 2 million jobs saved because of the actions of this government. The national living wage going up by £1,000 a year in April, and a £1,000 tax cut for millions of people on universal credit. Those are what we are doing, Mr Speaker, to put more money into people's pockets when they need it, and they can rely on us to continue supporting them, not just now, but for days and years into the future.
Mark Harper. Much, Mr Deputy Speaker. First of all, can I thank the Chancellor for coming to the House to make his statement before he does a press conference. That's the right order of priorities. Can I also thank him for listening and engaging with colleagues on this side of the House to listen to their concerns and responding to them in his statement. And finally, can I also contrast the realism and honesty with which he's grappled with global gas prices. You can't pretend that they haven't gone up, but what he's done is set out a package to smooth the impact for everybody and to help those on the lowest incomes. That's the right approach, demonstrates why we've got it right and the party opposite are not fit for office.
Yeah, Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. You know, those of us in government make responsible decisions, and we are honest with people. I think people respect that honesty, and it's the right thing for us to do, Mr Speaker. My honourable friend is absolutely right. There is a global surge in gas prices, and it would be wrong to pretend that we do not have to adjust to that. But what we can do is take the sting out of that adjustment, spread its impact over time, limit its immediate impact. That's the right and responsible approach, and I'm grateful for his support in that plan.
Nal Shah.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor comes here and says he's proud of his record. Let me tell him what my constituents are thinking of his record. The party opposite cut £20 a week for universal tax credit. It was dragged kicking and screaming here for U-turn after U-turn just to feed poor and hungry children. £350 doesn't cut it when he's wasted billions. Mr Speaker, more than £6 billion on wasted PPE, more than £4.7 billion on fraud for COVID funds. And he brings here $9 billion when he's lost $12 billion. So, you know, for my constituents, it doesn't quite cut it, and my constituents don't trust this government because they're not helping my constituents. Those at the bottom end are the ones that have been hit the most. It doesn't even come near the 700, let alone the cost of living.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady talks about universal credit. It was this government that provided the extra support to people during the crisis when they needed it. And actually, all the data, all the evidence shows that through the worst of the depths of this pandemic, the actions of this government helped those on the lowest incomes the most. And it is a record I am enormously proud of.
Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I realise to the champagne socialists on the opposite benches that £350 is not a lot of money. But I have to say, this is... my right honourable friend knows that I care about this issue deeply, and my constituents are just about managing, but this is a cost of living package for white men and women on the country, across the country, and in my constituency of Harlow. I could just ask him just to continue to do everything he can in the future to focus on the just about managing group of people who make up my constituents and make sure the government continues to cut the cost of living for hard-working families.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his support, and he rightly champions those people who are just about managing, who are working incredibly hard to build a better life for them and their families, and they should know that this government is on their side. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for his support, because we will continue to champion them.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. These plans are playing Russian roulette with taxpayers' money, gambling that prices will go down, rather than providing a real solution to help families avoid skyrocketing bills. It's just delaying the pain while increasing taxes by £600 a year for the average household. So why won't he listen to our suggestion for a package that would actually help families reduce their bills by £1,000 a year? Surely it's time to admit he's got it wrong. It's time to scrap the Conservative tax hikes.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what we haven't heard from the party is any plan to provide the funding that the NHS needs. Right? We all know that the NHS is grappling with recovering from COVID. There's an unprecedented scale of backlogs to work through, and social care system that needs urgent reform. The only way to grapple with those challenges is to provide the NHS and social care with a sustainable source of funding. That's what we are doing. It is the responsible and right approach. It is a progressive approach, and it will benefit people in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland as well as England. And in the long run, it will be the right thing for this country.
Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I congratulate my right honourable friend for the comprehensive package of support that he's provided, both fiscally responsible in the face of the energy volatility globally. My constituents will have the benefit and the reassurance of the rebate that he's announced on energy bills, but they won't have the reassurance of the council tax support that he's making available in England. Will he therefore at least encourage the Welsh Government to follow suit so my constituents have the same benefits as in England, or even take it a step further and insist that the benefit is passed on?
I thank my honourable friend. I can confirm that the Welsh administration will receive £175 million or so in Barnett consequentials, which will enable them to provide the similar discount. And my honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, will be speaking to the Welsh Government later today, and he will very much make the point that we would like to see that to the benefit of all of his constituents and those across Wales.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In terms of the council tax rebate, there are some of the poorest families who don't pay a significant amount of council tax because they're on council tax support schemes. Will they still get, even if their council tax bills are less than £150 a year, the full £150, will that therefore be paid in cash to them by the local authority in April? And in terms of the £150 million discretionary fund, will it be truly discretionary for councils to decide how they spend it, or are the government going to direct how it's spent?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, of course the honourable gentleman is well informed on these issues. Our intention is that those people do benefit from the £150, and that's why we are providing the discretionary fund. It's been sized with a sense of who those people are and how many they are. We will, of course, provide some guidance to local authorities about who we would expect the support to go to, but ultimately they will be able to make those decisions for themselves.
John Penrose.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Chancellor for an extremely welcome package, and it's the latest step, I think, in a series of very strong reactions to different crises throughout the pandemic and now today. He also mentioned improving the investment in North Sea gas fields, which is very welcome. But it is only a temporary set of issues. It's only a temporary set of solutions which will dull the initial economic pain without solving the long-term problem of sky-high energy prices. What conversations has he therefore had with his colleague sitting next to him, the Energy Secretary, about solutions to deal with those longer-term problems? And when can we expect to hear answers to those things to do with reforming the price cap, reforming the wholesale energy market and the like?
Yeah, well, my honourable friend is very thoughtful on these matters, and he's long made this point, and he's right to make this point, that we must also make sure that the long-term energy market is working in all our benefit. I can tell him that both the Energy Secretary, myself and the Prime Minister have been involved in these conversations for quite some time. The Energy Secretary is working on a set of measures which will address, I think, many of his concerns, and he should expect to hear from the government soon.
Alex Davis-Jones.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I just say how nice it is to see the Chancellor finally in his place? I know some of us have been considering filing a missing persons report, but given his absence in the recent weeks. And whilst I appreciate his update for families across Pontypridd and Taffy, it's just another case of too little too late. The Welsh Labour Government have doubled the Warm Home Discount Scheme, and Labour's proposal would have taken £600 off the bills for the poorest in our country. The Chancellor's plan gives them £350 off. Why has this fallen so far short of what is needed and what is proposed?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm sorry that she didn't welcome the £175 million in Barnett consequentials for the Welsh administration, but also this government is providing support, significant support to those on middle incomes, because they are also struggling, Mr Speaker, and we believe that is the right approach.
Bob Seeley.
Very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker. I welcome very much the Chancellor's recognition, as my honourable friend was saying, of the importance of a long-term energy policy. And also thank you very much indeed for his help for council taxpayers. The ATD ban will cover most folks on the island. Can he just confirm to me that he's talking about people with primary residences, both on the island but also nationally? Thank you.
Councillor.
Yes, my honourable friend makes an excellent point, and I can confirm that that £150 is not for those with either second homes or empty homes, and we will make that crystal clear in how the policy is executed.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. First of all, can I thank the Chancellor for his contribution. It's not to be churlish, there's a bit of money that's been set aside, we appreciate that. But with this further right of energy, along with the uplifted cost of living in general, we are looking at working families choosing what to cut out of their lives to make ends meet. Whilst I very much welcome the news and put it on record, the £150 million for Northern Ireland and also the other Barnett consequentials that will come along as well, could I ask Chancellor this question? Would he consider and commit to reviewing the child benefit threshold for families whose wages are the same and yet it simply isn't worth the same in real money terms as it did when the threshold was introduced in 2013? Thank you very much.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his question, and I'm glad he recognises there are two sets of Barnett consequentials for Northern Ireland stemming from each of the two policies, which sum total £250 million. He will appreciate I can't comment on future tax and welfare policy, but as always I will take what he says and reflect on it.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I warmly welcome the Chancellor's statement because of 94% of properties in Stoke-on-Trent are council tax band A to C. So therefore this £150 rebate is going to do wonders across Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Torp. But on his recent visit to the city of Stoke-on-Trent, he knows that the ceramics sector is an energy-intensive industry and is going to be looking for some more creative solutions in the short term to help them with rising energy costs. Can he confirm that he will meet with me and the other Stoke-on-Trent MPs to discuss these ideas further?
Councillor.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm always happy to meet with my honourable friends from Stoke, which benefited from not just one, not just two, but three successful levelling up fund bids, which I was pleased to visit recently. He's right, and he's a proper champion for the ceramic sector in this House. Rightly, I enjoyed meeting representatives from that sector on my recent visit. I'll be happy to meet with him and them to discuss the situation further.
Barry Shearman.
Mr Deputy Speaker, we all know that the Chancellor is a fast-talking, slick operator who knows how to keep your head down when it's useful. But could I tell him that someone who's been in this House since 1979, he's the most incompetent Chancellor I've ever seen. And when children go to bed, he doesn't like it, Mr Speaker. When children in my constituency go to bed with no food in their tummies, with no heat in their homes, what does he really think is the honourable position of a Chancellor who has just allowed one of his policies directly to be taken in fraud, £4.3 billion of fraud under his watch? Any other Chancellor that I've known would have come to the House today to resign.
Mr. Speaker, I'll let this government's record on economic policy speak for itself. It's a record I'm proud of. But I can provide the honourable gentleman with the assurance that I and the government remain committed to tackling fraud wherever we see it. He mentions a figure in £4.9 billion. As I mentioned to the House in orals on Tuesday, that estimate has already been reduced, Mr. Speaker, by a third, by £1.6 billion because of the actions we are taking. I won't go into them all now, but he should know that we will go after everyone wherever we can to recover that money for the taxpayer, and I'm confident that we will do a very good job.
Jacob Young.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is a targeted package that helps us just about managing, which is entirely right. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, under the last Labour government, the party opposite closed 6 nuclear power stations and had a policy of no new nuclear. Does he agree with me that alongside these measures to help people in the short term, it's imperative that we invest in our long-term energy security, in domestic gas production, in renewables, and crucially, in new nuclear?
My honourable friend is absolutely right about some of the failures of policy that the party opposite propagated in power. That is being fixed, my honourable friend, the Energy Secretary. We are not just investing in new nuclear, as he said, with billions of pounds at the spending review, but also in offshore wind, and as he knows in his part of the world, carbon capture and storage and hydrogen, where Teesside is playing a starring role in that green energy revolution.
Ben Lake.
Diolch, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor will be aware that nearly 20% of households in Wales are not connected to the mains gas grid. In rural areas like Ceredigion, that figure actually rises to over 80%. And research by the Office for National Statistics notes that Ceredigion suffered the highest increase in fuel bills of any area in mainland UK in the past year, increasing by £863 on average. So can I ask the Chancellor to confirm whether the rebate announced today will also apply to households that are not connected to the main power grids?
The honourable gentleman actually makes an excellent point, and one that colleagues not just in Wales but in England and Scotland will also be asking, not least my own constituents. What I can tell him is the rebate will be delivered through electricity bills to solve that exact problem that he mentions, which is obviously much more universal. And separately, obviously, the council tax discount in England is through the council tax system, so it's agnostic to the heating source, and I would expect the Welsh Government, should they choose to do the same thing, will also be able to solve that problem in that way.
Jane Stevenson.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. This is quite simply a superb plan. We're very well done. And I would also say that he's right to question the opposition's idea of a windfall tax, given Gordon Brown completely stifled the telecoms market in the late 90s by doing exactly the same. Speaking as the chair of the APPG for district councils, I wonder if my right honourable friend would join me in thanking councils for once again being able to offer swift and agile responses to local communities and families in helping us to deliver this today. Thank you.
As a former local government minister, Mr Deputy Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to pay tribute to district councils and the work of the District Council Network. Head of John Fuller is still running it, but they do an excellent job. And once again, when we need them to help us deliver policies, they step up. I can confirm also they will, of course, receive New Burdens funding for doing that. But I thank them for all the work they do. She's right to champion them.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Already before COVID, a third of children in Hull North, many in working families, were living in poverty. With the cost of living crisis and the energy prices soaring, will the measures that the Chancellor is introducing today see an increase or a decrease in the number of children living in poverty by Christmas?
Yeah, good question.
Mr Speaker, thanks to the actions of this and previous governments, since 2010 there are 200,000 fewer children living in poverty as a result of the actions that governments have taken. And also we know that children growing up in workless households are 5 times more likely to be in poverty than those who have working parents, which is why it's a very good news that the number of children in workless households has fallen by 700,000 over the past decade. That's the best way to get children out of poverty, find jobs for their parents, and that's what this government is committed to doing.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, for his honesty in stating that we cannot completely remove the inflationary global pressures, and for his focus on supporting hard-working middle-income and lower-income families. But I wish to ask him about the discretionary £150 million fund, in particular for those who are living in military accommodation, family military accommodation, who are not eligible to pay council tax. Will he ensure that that fund is directed to ensure that all those military families are eligible for that £150 discount?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and she's right to highlight one of the categories of those I mentioned who are exempt, but that we do want to get support to, and they're included in the discretionary fund. And I know she also, in our conversations, highlighted those living in rural constituencies like hers who are off gas grid, and I hope that she is reassured by the answer that I gave to the honourable gentleman from Ceredigion.
Karen Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor's buy now, pay back later, while ignoring those eye-watering profits from the oil and gas companies, as he did the fraudsters, tell us all we need to know about whose side he is on. Prepayment meter customers face a much higher rate of £708 on average. Can you tell us how these plans are going to help people who pop down to the corner shop to top up their pre-made cards?
Mr Deputy Speaker, there are around 4 million households who are on prepayment meters. About 40% of those will be able to receive the rebate on bills automatically because of the nature of their prepayment meter. For the remaining 60%, we will have to do something more manual. The various different ways that we can do that, whether it's by sending barcodes or QR codes through the post or through email, and that is exactly, before the party opposite starts saying anything, that is exactly how we already deliver the Warm Homes discount to those people. And when we did something similar in 2012 in the coalition, we did exactly the same thing. It's less than 9% of all households, but we have a plan for them. We'll work with the energy companies to make sure all of those on prepayment meters benefit in exactly the same way.
Philip Holloway.
Residents in the Kettering constituency will warmly welcome the assistance that the Chancellor has announced to help them with their rising energy bills. But in addition to the measures he's announced today, there is an additional £1.8 billion of support out there in terms of unclaimed pension credit. 1 million pensioners are eligible and are not claiming, including 4,500 in Northamptonshire. Just as we reached out to pensioners to come forward to get their vaccination, please can we reach out to these people who are not claiming, because some of them have some of the highest energy bills.
My honourable friend makes an excellent point, which he also made the other day in orals, and we committed to looking at how best we can take up his suggestions. I think I'm right in saying, and my energy secretary friend will correct me if I'm wrong, but with regard to the warm home discount, I think it is moving, if it's not already, to a more automatic system for those on pension credit for that rebate. But we will, of course, take his suggestions on board and figure out how best to improve what we do.
Geraint Davis.
Mr Deputy Speaker, each week the Prime Minister tells us there's 420,000 more people at work than there were before the pandemic, yet the Office for National Statistics tells us that there's 506,000 fewer people at work than before the pandemic. And the reason for that, as the Chancellor knows, is the Prime Minister excludes the self-employed. Will he correct the record that there are in fact 500,000 fewer people at work, and explain in the circumstances why he's imposing a massive national insurance tax on jobs?
Mr Deputy Speaker, if he looks at the remarks I made earlier, I was clear that there are 400,000 more people on payroll, and that is the right use of that statistic. It's obviously harder to track those in self-employment because we have RTI numbers from HMRC for those on payroll. And with regard to jobs, Mr Speaker, I'm very proud of our track record. We were forecast to have unemployment in this country reach 12%. Millions and millions of people unemployed. Unemployment has now fallen for almost 10 straight months. It's almost back to the record lows we saw pre-pandemic. We've got record job vacancies, record low redundancies, and that is all evidence, Mr Deputy Speaker, of that our plan for jobs is working.
Steve Baker.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. As somebody who supported a VAT cut, can I invite my right honourable friend to confirm that people in Wickham will receive more help faster under his plan?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and I can give him that reassurance that the vast majority of people in his constituency will receive £350. Those in council tax bands A to D will get £150 in April. That is more than what a VAT cut would have given those people, and it will come faster, and I'm very grateful to have his continued support.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Older people, sick people at home and many disabled people will need to put on their heating for longer and therefore will be paying more. What additional steps will he take to ensure that they're not pushed further in poverty, not least as he is tangled with the pension triple lock this year? What has he got against older people?
Mr Speaker, this government and previous Conservative governments have a proud track record of supporting those who are retired and are pensioners. That because of the triple lock that has been in place, because of a Conservative government, pensions are now at their highest level relative to earnings in 30-odd years, and we are protecting pensioners with a double lock this forthcoming year. And of course, the winter fuel payment, Mr Deputy Speaker, up to £300 of support for those over the state pension age will address exactly the concerns that she has.
Matt Vickers.
Martin.
Sorry,
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It must have been the mask, but as the Chancellor did at the time of the pandemic, he's put together a very comprehensive protective shield around people in my constituency, and that's very welcome. And many well-paid jobs are being created, particularly in the energy sector, thanks to government policies. But there are many, particularly in, say, food processing or the security sector, on very modest incomes and those on fixed incomes. Can my right honourable friend give an assurance to them that he will keep this policy under review so that if the energy crisis continues, as is likely, they can be reassured that support will be available?
My honourable friend is always a champion of those who are working hard and doing the right thing, and that's why he's rightly championed the Freeport in his constituency to provide jobs and opportunity for those families. I can give him that reassurance, and it's because it is likely that energy prices remain high and may even increase when the October price cap is set, that the rebate of £200 will come in October in that month, which hopefully will help at that time if energy bills continue to rise then, and of course the 150 comes much sooner than that, which give him the reassurance he needs. But as I said earlier as well, we do have to be honest, Mr Deputy Speaker, and recognise we are all going to have to adjust to higher energy prices, but what we can do is slow the pace and scale of that adjustment for families across the country.
Mike Amesbury.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Is the Chancellor comfortable about the fact he's given more support to fraudsters writing off billions of pounds of debt than he is to hard-pressed families? That just prolongs the pain. This will be paid, this 54% pay rise over 4 years, won't it, Chancellor?
Well, Mr Speaker, as Deputy Speaker, as I outlined earlier this week, nothing has been written off. We are committed to going after everybody who has defrauded the taxpayer. And it's important to remember the context, Mr Speaker. Yes. You know, these schemes were delivered at enormous scale. Yeah. 9 million people benefited from the furlough scheme. 1.5 million small businesses benefited from bounce-back loans. And at the time, we can remember the context. Yes. I was here almost every other day, rightly being held to account by members on both sides about the speed of support that we were getting to businesses in all of our constituencies who needed cash as quickly as possible. In those circumstances, I had to make balanced trade-offs and judgments about the best way to support those people. I'm confident in the judgments that we made, but it is also right, now that we are through the pandemic, we will go after anyone who has defrauded the government and the taxpayer with the full force of the law.
Sally Ann Hart.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'm going to join my colleagues on this bench, and I'm sure many who are also secretly thanks on the opposition bench for these measures today. As my right honourable friend is aware, we have some real deprivation in my beautiful constituency of Hastings and Rye. Can he confirm that the measures announced by him today target support to the most vulnerable and disadvantaged in my constituency and are more generous as well as financially sensible than Labour's uncosted plans and will reach the families who most need help now?
Well, Fred is absolutely right. Getting cash to people who need it quickly is paramount in this circumstance, which is why the £150 will go to those in her constituency in council tax bands A to D in April, which will provide immediate relief. And as she said, this is a financially responsible approach to this problem, because we do have to continue getting our borrowing and debt down. So the plan that we put in place maintains us on our path. And it's actually important to recognise, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I've made this point before, the reason why one of the reasons I care about getting our borrowing and debt to better levels is that so we then have the resilience to respond to shocks exactly like this. And that's why it's important that we do rebuild that resilience.
Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor's package offers £350 off to the poorest households. Labour's proposals offer £600 off to the poorest households. The cap has gone up by £693. Why is the Chancellor offering the poorest households so much less than they would get under Labour?
Mr Deputy Speaker, we on this side of the House believe that it is also right that we support those on middle incomes. Those families are also working hard as well, and they deserve our support. It's important they know the government is on their side at times like this. That's why we've taken the approach that we have. But of course, we are cognizant of those on lower incomes, which, as I said, this is a progressive package. Flat rate payments are a greater percentage of the income for people on lower incomes, and indeed with smaller energy bills. And as I've outlined, we have a range of other interventions specifically targeted at those people.
Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome this very generous plan, especially the inclusion of families on middle incomes, which will do a lot to help many of my constituents here in Rushcliffe. And would the Chancellor agree with me that now is the time for us to be investing in our domestic energy industry, in our energy security, in turbocharging our move to clean energy, like we're doing in the East Midlands Freeport, rather than risk driving investment from the UK with a counterproductive windfall tax like the party opposite would?
I completely agree with my honourable friend. She puts the point excellently well. We on this side of the House are in favour of more investment in domestic energy. We're in favour of more jobs for the British economy, and we're in favour of greater energy security for our nation.
And Cowan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. With families facing an extra £2,800 of expenses, this package really doesn't touch the sides at all, does it? With regard to electricity, the Chancellor has said, with the government meeting the cost in full. But you're not, are you? You're spreading over 5 years, which means next year, when the electricity prices continue to rise, the poorest families will be faced with increased bills and having to find £40 to pay back the Chancellor. You've not put a lid on it, Chancellor, you've just kicked the can further down the road.
Mr Deputy Speaker, as the honourable gentleman from Harlow said earlier, £350 is a significant amount of money for families up and down this country, and I think it will make a real difference and lessen the anxiety that they have. And what I was talking about was the council tax rebate, which will be fully exchequer funded with no cash due back.
Mike Wood.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I thank the Chancellor for meeting with me and with colleagues and for responding so positively on this issue. He may remember I asked him to ensure that any support extended to cover those just above benefit thresholds, because they're often most in need of help. How does the support he has announced today for those constituents compare with the suggestions made opposite?
My honourable friend, as ever, makes a thoughtful contribution, and I enjoyed our conversations. He was right to champion those who are on middle incomes, and because of those conversations with him and others, we have designed a package that does exactly as I think he would like to have seen, and by targeting support at those in council tax bands A to D, 4 out of 5 households, those up to middle income, those just about managing, will receive the support, £150 extra, and they will get that support in April.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. A poll by Survation today reveals that 63% of the public support a windfall tax on oil and gas producers' profits. Yeah. It's not like this government to ignore the polls. So can I suggest that rather than misnaming, as he did in his statement, a renewable loan as a discount, why not go for the windfall tax and give that money to our hard-pressed constituents?
Yeah. Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, we've had this debate. We believe on this side of the House in more investment in our domestic energy sector. We want to support British jobs. We want to support British energy security. And we believe in doing the right, responsible things. And that's what a responsible Conservative government does.
Saki Bhatti.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for these packages which will help my constituents across my constituency. But just on the issue of the windfall tax, would my right honourable friend be able to confirm that the Labour Party's call for a windfall tax would actually undermine competition in the market, it would reduce investment, it would kill off jobs, ultimately it would mean that it would keep energy prices likely to be higher for longer and hit the poorest the hardest?
Yeah, my honourable friend is exactly right. 200,000 jobs are supported in that industry, and as I pointed out earlier, there are £11 billion worth of projects waiting to get going. I would like to see those projects go ahead. That will be good for the country's energy security, good for our economy, good for jobs, and I know that the Energy Minister and I share that ambition.
Brendan Clark-Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor for his statement and just say my constituents in Bassetlaw will be breathing a sigh of relief for his announcements today, which blow the opposition's VAT cut out of the water. Yeah. The Chancellor mentioned wholesale prices, and as we become more self-sufficient and move to renewables and nuclear, would the Chancellor be able to outline what the Government and the Treasury are doing to tackle this problem at source? And may I suggest the excellent STEP fusion project in Bassetlaw that we're bidding for?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend's support, and I'm glad that this announcement will provide some reassurance to his constituents who I know would be worried about the cost of living, and this should provide them with some reassurance on that. I have warm noises about his fusion project from my honourable friend, the Energy Secretary. We did have, I think, £120 million announced, I think that's right, for advanced nuclear technologies at the spending review, and no doubt there can be a productive conversation to be had about how we allocate that money on projects like his.
Andrew Jones.
Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for their statement today and confirming that this significant £9 billion package is going to be targeted for those who need help most. He also highlighted that 80% of cost increases are coming from the global wholesale price increase. So is he going to continue his focus to try to insulate the UK as much as possible from those global price fluctuations? Increase our energy security, boost domestic production, ensure it's diverse in nature, sustainable for the future, but also significant in scale.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and it's important that we have diversity of supply. That is what we are doing, whether it's offshore wind, whether it's nuclear, whether it's carbon capture and storage, exploiting domestic gas. We're doing all of those things to build that diversity of supply for our security, and he's right to highlight that in the long term, that's the right policy for British customers.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I really welcome these really targeted and fair measures that will help those that need the help most. So whilst Labour's VAT plans would help by just £89, I really welcome that this council tax rebate will help 89% of households in Yorkshire and Humber. I've just had the figures through, with £150 rebate. And will he also confirm that those that do fall outside the A to D bandings, that do still need help, will be able to get help through the extra discretionary funding for local councils?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, because I know this is an issue that was on his mind, and he wanted to make sure that his constituents got the support that they needed at a time of anxiety for them. And I can confirm that the £144 million discretionary fund is exactly there to take care of those people. We estimate around 300,000 people, for example, Mr Deputy Speaker, who are on means-tested benefits, who happen to live in council tax bands above A to D. That's why that discretionary fund is there, to get support to the people he mentioned.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I first off start by thanking the Chancellor for £350 help that will really benefit everyone in Rother Valley. But does he agree with me that it's right this government is not just helping those on means-tested benefits, but those not on benefits, the lower and middle income families, because they also need the helping hand. It's great this government rewards hard work and those who are doing the right thing.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and he has championed his constituents who are working hard and doing the right thing, and today's announcement will give them the reassurance that this government and their Member of Parliament is on their side.
And finally, my former constituent, Mr Holden.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Did he vote for you? It was a pleasure to see you in the chair, sir. Could my right honourable friend confirm that all UK households will benefit from the £200 smoothing rebate, and that almost 95% of County Durham residents will benefit from the £150 council tax rebate, including those off-grid?
a similar proportion than in the constituency of the Honourable Member for Doncaster North, who I see is now scuttled away. This £150 is over 50% more than Labour's VAT plan, which would have actually benefited those of the largest and richest people most. Will the Chancellor continue to pursue a one-nation Conservative approach, not an inner London two-kitchen one?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, so many excellent points in my honourable friend's question. The only thing I will correct him on, the energy rebate is Great Britain-wide because the Northern Ireland energy market is devolved and we don't have the legal powers or the regulator to do that. Everything else he said was spot on, and I can confirm to him that this government will continue to be on the side of supporting his hard-working constituents that he does a great job to champion. Today's announcement will give them the reassurance that they need, that at a time of rising prices, this Conservative government is stepping in to help, as we have done and we always will.
I'd like to thank the Chancellor for his statement and answering questions for well over an hour. We will now pause as people leave and others come in while we go on to the next statement. That's what happens when you move away.
Very good.
Order. We now come to the next statement from the Minister of State for Health, and the statement is an update from the Department of Health and Social Care. Ed Aga.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And with permission, I'd like to update the House on our purchasing efforts in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. A little over 2 years ago, we, along with the whole world, found ourselves in unprecedented circumstances. We were faced with a virus about which we knew very little, but we did know from day one that our absolute priority was to save lives and protect our most vulnerable. Throughout the pandemic, we have worked night and day to make sure those performing heroics on the front line have the protection they need. This includes making the tough but necessary decisions needed to keep the country safe. With the pandemic pushing health systems across the world to breaking point, we acted quickly and decisively to protect the NHS and help it to continue providing world-class care to the public. In a highly competitive global market, and with many countries imposing export bans, we were nonetheless able to secure the protective equipment needed. We secured billions of items of PPE. We obtained 30,000 ventilators by the end of June 2020, and we delivered over 17.5 billion items to protect our frontline workers. The supply of these vital items has helped keep the NHS open throughout the pandemic. But the scale of the challenge we faced in sourcing these items should not be underestimated. The unique and unprecedented situation during the early days of the pandemic led to huge inflation in prices and intense global competition to secure scarce supplies. For instance, the average cost of a nitrile glove increased over six-fold at the height of the pandemic compared to pre-pandemic levels. At this time of national emergency, when lives were on the line, we simply had to change our approach to procurement and our appetite for risk. Balancing the risk of contracts not performing and supplies being priced at a premium against the risk to the health of frontline workers, the NHS and the public if we failed to get the PPE we so desperately needed. Mr Deputy Speaker, we make no apology for procuring PPE at the pace and volume we did based on the information we had at the time. The action we took protected thousands of frontline healthcare workers in the NHS and social care. However, now that the world market for PPE has stabilised, the value of some categories of goods is now inevitably much lower than the price they were originally purchased for. I want to reinforce to the House that 97% of the PPE we ordered was suitable and fit for use, with only a small proportion deemed not suitable. And we are actively seeking to recover costs from suppliers wherever possible in those cases. Throughout the pandemic, the Department's anti-fraud unit has acted quickly to investigate all allegations of fraud, and we will be looking to recover any money from damaged or inadequate stock. We are now in a position where we are confident that we have sufficient stock to cover all future COVID-19 related demands, even in the face of the Omicron variant. The PPE stocks we secured have allowed us to meet demand through 2021 and 21-22, and our existing PPE stocks will continue to support us throughout 2022-23. We will keep working to maximise value from our stockpile, as the high standards of protection we have set for NHS workers mean that some of it may be able to be used in alternative settings. And the Department has set up a redistribution team to identify alternative uses for stock that we do not intend or expect to use. For example, donating masks to both the Department of Transport and Department for Education to aid compliance with face covering requirements on public transport, or to support schools following their reopening back in March 2021. Medical professionals within my department have also been working closely with colleagues within medical surveillance authorities to review stock which has exceeded its manufacturer's use-by date, but is not necessarily unusable. We have also begun a tender for a third-party medical laboratory to provide official testing of PPE products with a view to extending their shelf life. Mr. Deputy Speaker, during the pandemic, we have taken steps to strengthen this country's PPE supply chain, including manufacturing more PPE here in the UK. We have now signed contracts with over 30 UK-based companies, reducing our reliance on manufacturers overseas, and we now have high confidence that we have sufficient stock to cover all future COVID-19 related demands. Getting PPE to those who need it has been one of the toughest logistical tasks of this pandemic. We make no apologies for taking the steps that were necessary so we could save lives and protect this country at its time of need. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement. But what a disgrace that the Secretary of State didn't come to the House today to account for the inexcusable and unacceptable level of waste in his department, or when the department first published the accounts, or 2 days afterwards when they were reported on the front pages of several national newspapers and across broadcast news. Perhaps the Secretary of State's silence and his absence tells us that he's relaxed about losing billions of pounds of taxpayers' money, or perhaps it is simply that he is too ashamed to show his face. The fact is that the Secretary of State had to be dragged to the House, and then when he was, he bottled it and sent his deputy. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Department for Health and Social Care snuck out its annual accounts on the final day upon which it was legally required, 10 months after the end of the financial year, and by total coincidence, I'm sure, at 5:30 p.m. on the day that Sue Gray published her update. Buried on page 199 was the revelation that the department lost a staggering £8.7 billion on PPE. That's more than 2/3 of the department's total spend on PPE, written off as losses, double the amount they're spending on the hospital building programme, almost as much as we spend on the salaries of every nurse in England for an entire year. Why? Because it was unusable, going out of date, and bought in at eye-watering prices because the government was in a state of desperation, having run down our supplies before the pandemic arrived. Now, we know that many members opposite privately, sometimes even publicly, agree with Labour that the national insurance rise is an unfair hit on working families facing a cost of living crisis. So how will they explain to their voters that, taken together with the £4.3 billion they handed out to fraudsters, this government has thrown away more than a year of receipts of the national insurance rise they're now imposing on working families? It's not just that they are the party of high taxes because they are the party of low growth. It is that they are the party of high taxes because they are the party of waste and incompetence. And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, think of what the NHS could have done with these funds: reducing waiting lists and waiting times, improving access to GPs, rebuilding hospitals for the 21st century. And, of course, COVID came as a shock. That doesn't explain why the Conservative government run down Britain's supply of PPE before the pandemic, leaving us exposed to price hikes and profiteering. And perhaps the Minister can explain why a global pandemic necessarily leads to Conservative Party donors and the pub landlord of the former Secretary of State receiving special treatment and hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money. And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it isn't just PPE. Why did his department fail to collect shipments from ports on time, costing taxpayers £111 million in additional fees? Why did his department fail to pay their bills on time and incur late fees of £1.6 million as a result? Why did they spend £250 million on testing materials, ventilators and medical equipment, none of which can be used? Isn't it the case, Mr Deputy Speaker, that when this Conservative government thought that no one was watching, they abandoned any pretence of being careful stewards of public finances, bung millions to their mates and donors, and now working families are footing the bill? What would Mrs Thatcher, the grocer's daughter whose father instilled in her the value of thrift, make of this lot? Mr Deputy Speaker, isn't it a truth that the Conservative Party has changed? You can't trust this Conservative Party to show respect to the people or to Parliament. You can't trust this Conservative Party to keep taxes low. You can't trust this Conservative Party to spend taxpayers' money wisely. Indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker, the only thing that hasn't changed about the Conservatives is the age-old truth that you can't trust the Tories with the NHS.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Well, it's always a pleasure to appear opposite the Shadow Secretary of State. I won't take it as a personal affront that he would prefer it to be the Secretary of State rather than me. He raised a number of important points. Firstly, he cited Mrs Thatcher and suggested that the government had changed its position. I have to say, if we're talking about sudden changes in position, I quote the now Shadow Chancellor, formerly Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy, who wrote to my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, in April of 2020, saying, "We need government to strain every sinew and utilise untapped resources in UK manufacturing to deliver essential equipment to frontline workers. This must be a national effort which leaves no stones unturned." She was right. I agree with her sentiment then, and I still do, and we did. It appears the opposition don't anymore. Turning to other points he made, he kept referring, and it makes a good headline for him, I'm sure, but sadly I fear it is simply inaccurate to suggest that this is money lost. Or wait, it is not. This is, as he knows from his previous days as a Shadow Treasury Minister, this is a reflection of buying PPE at the height of the market, at the height of a global pandemic, and now looking at it in accounting terms as to, I'll turn to that point in a moment, as to what its value is today. He should also be aware the vast bulk of this 8.7 billion is exactly for that reason, purchased at the height of the market. Now we have a stable market, we have a sustainable supply. And I make no apologies, and members on this side of the House I know will make no apologies for doing exactly what the Shadow Chancellor said we should do, which is strain every sinew to make sure that the NHS had the PPE it needed. We achieved that. In terms of, I'll turn to that point actually, and that's an important point in just a second. He's also wrong to say it was thrown away. He knows that that is not what has happened here. He knows that this is about stock that's been written down in value, not written off. He knows the vast bulk of that remaining is fit for use, but we set very high standards in the NHS, but it's fit for use in other settings, and we're ensuring that we explore those other avenues so it can be used. He talked about pub landlords. I would just gently say to him, and he will have heard the Right Honourable Member, the member for West Suffolk, make this point in this chamber, that no contract was awarded to that individual. So I think I would just caution him to be a little bit careful in the allegations he makes and to check his facts before he does so. Turning to his broader point, the broader themes there, he talks about running down PPE stocks. Can he name any country in Europe that did not also have to buy vast amounts of PPE at the height of the pandemic, at the height of the market, because this pandemic was unprecedented? We learnt more about it every day that passed. When we first started purchasing PPE, we were confronted with horrific pictures from hospitals in Bergamo, in Italy. We saw the challenges that were faced. We moved fast to ensure our front line had what it needed. We strained every sinew. We got the PPE that our country needed.
Andrew Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I ask my right honourable